The sun cast long shadows across the polished hood of a midnight blue BMW X7, its pristine finish reflecting the golden California sunset. Behind the wheel sat Gabrielle Anderson, her perfectly tailored Chanel suit and carefully styled hair speaking volumes about her position as one of San Francisco's most successful investment bankers. The familiar streets of Pacific Heights stretched before her, a route she had driven countless times during her 15 years as managing director at Morrison and Pierce Financial Group. Today, however, something felt different. The weight of the documents in her designer handbag seemed heavier than usual, each page representing years of careful observation and meticulous documentation. Gabrielle adjusted her rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of her determined expression. At 42, she had fought her way to the top of San Francisco's financial elite, breaking barriers and shattering expectations. The daughter of a high school teacher and a nurse, she had earned her way into Harvard Business School, graduating at the top of her class before building her reputation in the unforgiving world of high finance. The flash of red and blue lights in her mirror caught her attention, accompanied by the sharp wail of a police siren. Gabrielle's manicured fingers tightened slightly on the steering wheel as she guided her vehicle to the curb, her mind already racing through protocols she had unfortunately become all too familiar with over the years. Officer Michael Reynolds stepped out of his patrol car, his boots crunching against the asphalt. At 34, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had spent the last decade enforcing his own brand of justice on these streets. His hand rested casually on his belt as he approached the BMW, flashlight beam cutting through the growing dusk. "License and registration," he called out, his tone carrying that familiar edge Gabrielle had heard too many times before. She reached for her bag slowly, deliberately, her movements measured and calm. The leather of her Hermes Birkin bag creaked softly as she opened it. "May I ask why I'm being stopped, officer?" Gabrielle's voice was steady, professional, the same tone she used in boardroom negotiations worth millions. Reynolds' flashlight beam lingered on her face a moment too long before sliding over the interior of her vehicle. This vehicle was reported in connection with a series of high-end thefts in the area, he replied, though his eyes narrowed at the sight of her expensive suit and jewelry. "Pretty nice car for..." He let the sentence hang, unfinished but heavy with implication. Gabrielle met his gaze in the mirror, years of experience having taught her to read between such lines. "For someone like me?" She completed his thought, her voice carrying a quiet strength that seemed to catch Reynolds off guard. Little did Officer Reynolds know, but this routine stop was about to become anything but routine. The contents of Gabrielle's bag would not only challenge his assumptions, but would set in motion a chain of events that would reverberate through the entire San Francisco Police Department. "Step out of the vehicle," Officer Reynolds commanded, his voice hardening as he processed Gabrielle's subtle challenge. She complied with practiced composure, her Louboutin heels clicking softly against the pavement as she emerged from the BMW. The evening air had grown cooler, carrying the faint scent of the bay. Around them, curious neighbors peered through curtained windows, some already reaching for their phones. Gabrielle stood tall, her six-figure suit a stark contrast to Reynolds' confrontational stance. "Pop the trunk," he ordered, gesturing toward the back of the vehicle. Gabrielle pressed the key fob, the hydraulic system lifting the trunk with a soft whir. Reynolds circled the car, his flashlight beam dancing across the immaculate interior, finding nothing but a designer gym bag and a stack of financial reports. "Having trouble finding what you're looking for, Officer Reynolds?" Gabrielle asked, noting how his jaw tightened at her calm inquiry. She reached for her bag again, movement slow and deliberate. "Perhaps I can help you understand something." "Keep your hands where I can see them," Reynolds snapped, his right hand instinctively moving toward his holster. The gesture wasn't lost on Gabrielle. In fact, it was exactly what she had expected. "Officer Reynolds," she began, her voice carrying the same authority she used when addressing board members. I'm reaching into my bag for something you need to see. I assure you it's not a weapon, it's something far more powerful." Reynolds watched, tension visible in his shoulders, as Gabrielle slowly opened her Birkin bag. Inside, beneath her wallet and phone, lay a thick manila envelope. The name embossed on its surface caught the beam of his flashlight. "Internal Investigation Division, Confidential Report." "What's that supposed to be?" Reynolds asked, but the slight waver in his voice suggested he already knew this wasn't going to end well for him. "This, Officer Reynolds, is a detailed report documenting 18 months of traffic stops in this district," Gabrielle replied, removing the envelope with careful precision. "More specifically, it contains data about your traffic stops and those of your fellow officers. The patterns are interesting, to say the least." Reynolds took an involuntary step back, his confident demeanor cracking slightly. "You're not authorized to have those documents," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. A small smile played at the corners of Gabrielle's lips as she pulled out her credentials. "Actually, I am. Gabrielle Anderson, Deputy Commissioner of the Police Oversight Committee, Governor's special appointment. But you wouldn't know that, would you? You were too busy making assumptions about what a black woman in a luxury car must be up to." The silence that followed was deafening. Reynolds stared at her credentials, then at the envelope, his face draining of color as the reality of his situation began to sink in. But Gabrielle wasn't finished, not by a long shot. This moment, this interaction, was about to become a catalyst for change that would shake the department to its core. 18 months, Officer Reynolds," Gabrielle continued, her voice cutting through the evening air. "In that time, you've pulled over 347 vehicles. Would you care to guess the demographic breakdown of those stops?" Reynolds shifted his weight, the crunch of gravel under his boots suddenly seeming too loud in the tense atmosphere. His hand had fallen away from his holster, the earlier bravado replaced by growing unease. "I don't know what you're implying," he managed, but his eyes kept darting to the envelope in Gabrielle's hands. The street lamps had flickered on, casting long shadows across the scene. "I'm not implying anything, officer. I'm stating facts," Gabrielle replied, opening the envelope. 78% of your stops involve minority drivers. Of those stops, 92% resulted in vehicle searches. And the number of citations or arrests from those searches, less than 3%. She pulled out a graph, its colored bars telling a damning story in simple visual terms. But here's what's truly fascinating. When we cross-reference the makes and models of vehicles stopped, an interesting pattern emerged. Luxury vehicles driven by minorities were stopped at 6 times the rate of similar vehicles driven by white drivers. A car passed by slowly, its headlights illuminating the scene briefly. Reynolds' face showed a mix of emotions, defensive anger warring with the dawning realization that this wasn't just another traffic stop gone wrong. "Look," he started, his tone shifting to something almost placating. "You can't just show up here with some statistics and—" "Actually, I can," Gabrielle interrupted, pulling out another document. "This is a copy of the warrant signed by Judge Harrison authorizing our investigation. And this," she produced another paper, "is a notice of your mandatory appearance before the Police Oversight Committee next Tuesday at 9 a.m. Reynolds took the notice with trembling fingers, his eyes scanning the official letterhead. "This isn't, I was just doing my job," he stammered. "Were you?" Gabrielle asked, her voice carrying a weight that made Reynolds flinch. "Because from where I'm standing, you were doing something very different. You were perpetuating a system of bias that's gone unchecked for far too long." She stepped closer, her heels clicking against the pavement. "But here's what makes tonight different, Officer Reynolds. You didn't just stop another successful black woman in a nice car. You stopped the person appointed to clean up this department. And you did it in exactly the way we've been investigating." The sound of more sirens approached in the distance. Reynolds looked up, confusion crossing his face as 2 unmarked vehicles turned onto the street, their lights flashing. "That would be internal affairs," Gabrielle explained, closing her bag. They're not here for me. Two men in suits emerged from the unmarked vehicles, their badges glinting in the streetlight. Chief Investigator Marcus Thompson, a veteran of internal affairs with 25 years of service, approached with measured steps. His partner, Agent David Chen, flanked him, tablet in hand, already documenting the scene. Deputy Commissioner Anderson, Thompson nodded respectfully. I see our timing was perfect. His eyes shifted to Reynolds, who stood frozen, still clutching the notice in his hands. Right on schedule, Gabrielle confirmed, handing Thompson the envelope. Officer Reynolds here was kind enough to provide us with a live demonstration of exactly what we've been investigating. Thompson took the envelope, though it was clear he was already familiar with its contents. Officer Reynolds, he said, his tone professional but stern, I'll need your badge and weapon. You're being placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. The color drained further from Reynolds' face. You can't! This isn't! He sputtered, looking between Gabrielle and Thompson. This was a setup. No, Officer Reynolds, Gabrielle corrected him. This was accountability. The setup was your own making. Every time you chose to profile a driver, every time you abused your authority, every time you let your biases dictate your actions. Agent Chen stepped forward, hand extended for Reynolds' badge and gun. The suspended officer's movements were mechanical as he surrendered his equipment, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. But this goes beyond you, Gabrielle continued, her voice carrying across the now quiet street. Tomorrow morning, similar scenes will play out across 12 different precincts. 28 officers, 4 sergeants, and 2 lieutenants will all be receiving the same notice you're holding. Thompson nodded grimly. Operation Clean Shield, he explained. 6 months in the planning, authorized by the governor himself. Deputy Commissioner Anderson has been instrumental in gathering the evidence we needed. Reynolds slumped against his patrol car, the weight of the moment crushing his previous arrogance. All this time, he muttered, looking at Gabrielle with new eyes. You were watching us? No, Officer Reynolds, Gabrielle corrected him, opening her car door. We were listening to the community. We were analyzing the data. We were doing what should have been done years ago, holding those in power accountable for their actions. She turned to Thompson. Chief Investigator, I trust you can handle things from here? I have an early meeting tomorrow with the police commissioner. We have a department to rebuild. Thompson nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Of course, Deputy Commissioner. I think we've all seen enough tonight. The next morning, the San Francisco Chronicle's headline read, Major Police Reform Operation Unveiled. Decades of Systemic Bias Exposed. Gabrielle sat in her office on the 40th floor of the financial district, watching the sunrise paint the bay in shades of gold. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing since the story broke. Deputy Commissioner, her assistant Marcus, called from the doorway. The mayor is on line 1, and CNN is requesting an interview. Also, the police commissioner has arrived for your meeting. Police Commissioner James Harrison entered the office, his usual commanding presence somewhat subdued. At 62, he had spent decades building his career, but nothing had prepared him for the earthquake that Gabrielle's investigation had unleashed. Quite a night, Harrison said, settling into the chair across from her desk. His eyes carried the weight of someone who hadn't slept. 28 officers suspended, and my inbox is flooded with reporters asking about Operation Clean Shield. Gabrielle turned from the window, her expression resolute. It's only the beginning, Commissioner. The data doesn't lie. We've documented over 3,000 questionable stops in the past year alone. But more importantly, we've identified the pattern of protection that allowed it to continue. She pressed a button on her desk, and the wall-mounted screen came to life, displaying a complex network of incidents, reports, and official responses. This isn't just about individual officers, Commissioner. It's about a system that protected them, promoted them, and perpetuated their behavior. Harrison leaned forward, studying the display. "You know this is going to shake public trust in the department," he said, though his tone suggested he understood the necessity. "No, Commissioner," Gabrielle corrected him, pulling up another screen of community feedback. "Public trust was already shaken. What this will do is show them we're finally taking action. That's why the second phase of Operation Clean Shield is even more important than the first." She handed him a thick binder labeled Department Reform Initiative, Phase 2. Inside were comprehensive plans for restructuring training programs, implementing community oversight committees, and establishing new accountability measures. "This is ambitious," Harrison admitted, flipping through the pages. "Complete overhaul of training protocols, mandatory bias recognition programs, community engagement requirements, and a new civilian oversight board," Gabrielle added, "with real power to investigate and recommend action. No more internal reviews that go nowhere. No more shuffling problem officers between precincts." The morning sun had fully risen now, its light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Outside, the city was waking up to a new reality, one where the thin blue line had been redrawn to include accountability and transparency. 3 months later, the community center in the heart of Oakland was packed to capacity. Hundreds of faces turned toward the podium where Gabrielle stood, her presence commanding yet approachable. Behind her sat a diverse panel of community leaders, police officials, and reform advocates. "When I opened my bag that night," Gabrielle began, her voice carrying through the hushed room, "Officer Reynolds expected to find something that would confirm his biases. Instead, he found something that would change the entire department." The screen behind her displayed statistics from the first quarter of reforms. Complaints down 40%, community engagement up 65%, and officer accountability measures showing promising results. "But numbers only tell part of the story," she continued, gesturing to a young officer in the front row. "Officer Rachel Martinez, would you please stand and share your experience with the new training program?" Martinez rose, her new badge gleaming under the lights. "The Reformed Academy training opened my eyes," she said, her voice clear and confident. "We're not just learning about laws and procedures anymore. We're learning about the communities we serve, about understanding different perspectives, about recognizing our own biases, and working to overcome them." Gabrielle nodded approvingly. "This is what real change looks like. Not just policies on paper, but a fundamental shift in how we approach law enforcement." The screen changed to show images of community policing initiatives, officers attending neighborhood meetings, participating in youth programs, and engaging with residents in meaningful ways. "As for Officer Reynolds," Gabrielle continued, a thoughtful expression crossing her face, "he recently completed our intensive retraining program. His letter requesting to address this gathering surprised me, but I believe in second chances when they're earned." "Officer Reynolds?" Reynolds stood from his seat in the middle of the room, noticeably different from the man who had stopped Gabrielle that night. The arrogance was gone, replaced by humility and understanding. "3 months ago, I was part of the problem," he began, his voice carrying the weight of genuine reflection. "I didn't see my biases, or maybe I didn't want to see them. But that night, Deputy Commissioner Anderson did more than expose my prejudices. She showed me there was a better way to serve." The room was silent, hanging on every word. Reynolds continued, "I'm not proud of who I was, but I'm committed to who I can become. The reform training program didn't just teach me new procedures, it taught me to see people, really see them, not just my assumptions about them." Gabrielle watched as heads nodded throughout the audience. This was the real victory, not just changing policies, but changing hearts and minds. A year later, Gabrielle stood in her office, now serving as the newly appointed police commissioner of San Francisco. The wall behind her desk displayed framed newspaper headlines chronicling the journey. "Police Reform Initiative shows groundbreaking results. San Francisco becomes model for national police reform. community trust in law enforcement reaches historic high. She picked up a framed photo from her desk, a picture from the police academy graduation ceremony last week. The graduating class was the most diverse in the department's history, each officer trained under the new protocols that she had helped establish. Her phone buzzed, a text from Rachel Martinez, now heading the Community Engagement Division. "You need to see this." Attached was a video taken earlier that day. The footage showed a traffic stop in Pacific Heights, not far from where Gabrielle's own encounter with Reynolds had taken place a year ago. In the video, a young black woman in a luxury car was being pulled over. But this time was different. The officer approached with respect, explained the reason for the stop clearly, and handled the interaction with professionalism and courtesy. The driver, initially tense, visibly relaxed as the officer treated her with dignity. Gabrielle smiled, recognizing the officer. It was Reynolds. He had earned back his badge, but more importantly, he had earned back the community's trust. The video ended with something remarkable: the driver thanking Reynolds for his professionalism, and Reynolds providing his badge number unprompted, ensuring transparency. At that evening's Community Oversight Board meeting, Gabrielle shared the video. "This," she said, gesturing to the screen, "is what we've been working toward, not just policy changes, but cultural transformation." The room erupted in applause, but Gabrielle raised her hand for silence. "But our work isn't done. What happened that night with my bag wasn't just about exposing problems. It was about showing us what's possible when we demand better, when we hold ourselves accountable, when we refuse to accept 'that's just how it is' as an answer." She pulled out her old Birkin bag, now a symbol of the change it had helped create. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments: a traffic stop, a bag, a choice to stand up and say, "Enough." The evening ended with the announcement of the program's expansion to other cities. Departments across the country were adopting San Francisco's model, creating a ripple effect of reform and accountability. As Gabrielle left the meeting, she passed the wall of honor in the precinct. Among the photos of officers who had made a difference was a new addition: the picture of her Birkin bag, now displayed as a reminder that change can come from unexpected places, and that true power lies not in authority, but in the courage to use it wisely. The legacy of that night lived on, not just in policies and procedures, but in the day-to-day interactions between officers and the communities they served. It was proof that one person, armed with truth and determination, could spark a revolution of reform that would impact generations to come. If this story moved you, share it with others. Let it be a reminder that change is possible, that accountability matters, and that sometimes the most powerful weapon against injustice is the courage to stand up and demand better. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that inspire change and challenge us to be better. Together, we can build a future where justice truly means justice for all.